Here we are. This week's What Comes Next Live is coming to you live from the offices of Tortoise Media in central London. My guest on the same screen this week is Tessa Murray, part of the team at Tortoise. I've been a member of Tortoise since, I think about 3 weeks before the pandemic started, when I was introduced by a friend, Toby from California, who said, I'm only a remote member, it must be great to be in London and go into Tortoise all the time to their think-ins. And I went to one with Paul Krugman, and then literally about 2 weeks later, the world changed and Tortoise did an utterly stunning job, in my mind, the best of any organization, of taking their connection with their members and ideas and stories online with the Tortoise think-ins. Tonight, however, Tessa and the team this is one of those, seemed like a good idea at the time. I'm coming to your Christmas event, I think you call it, or something like that. And therefore I thought, well, why don't we just do the recording beforehand and I'll just come in.
Great idea.
It seemed like a great idea at the time. Anyway, so after, there'll be chaos. If there's chaos all around us and lots of noise, you will understand why. So meanwhile, here we are at Tortoise, and welcome, Tessa.
Thank you, Tom. And so, yeah, you can hear by the banging doors and the chairs being dragged across floors upstairs that we are in the middle of just rejigging the entire office for the lates tonight, which is our Christmas special thinking with a quiz.
With a quiz?
With a quiz.
Okay. Well,
Be the editors.
I'm definitely in.
I know, I love quiz.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about, well, you and I have, I guess, connected a bit through Twitter here and there. You're not the face of Tortoise. You've been around for a while.
That's true.
Well, sorry.
I've been around a really long time.
Not as long as me. You're younger than me. But just, well, thank you. That's very kind of you. But tell me a little bit about Tortoise from your perspective, and what do you do around here?
Well, I mean, as I said, we are a startup, so frankly, I could be putting the bloody toner in the photocopy one day. No, but seriously, I joined. I've got a bit more time under my belt with Tortoise than you have. I joined in June 2019. Mm-hmm. So what's that? 3.5 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And I first got involved actually at the end of 2018. We did a Kickstarter to try to sort of raise a bit of money, but we had some backing from people, but it's really to create a sort of test bed of readers. Mm-hmm. So we did a Kickstarter, I think May have been the most successful journalistic project ever on Kickstarter. I don't quite forget what it was. But I actually backed the Kickstarter just as a punter, because I was obviously, I watched with great admiration what James Harding had done in his career at as editor of the Times and then the BBC. And when he left the BBC, as the director of comms in the city at the time, we were all like, what he's going to do next, And so when the Kickstarter came up, I thought, I like that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to put a little bit of money into it as just a normal Kickstarter thing. And then I sort of started coming to the prototype think-ins, and I knew James from back in the day with sort of the same age. We came up, around the same time. But I hadn't met Katie, Alex Smith, the other co-founder, before, and met her. And of course, that classic come and have a coffee turned into a sort of 3-day-a-week contract. So I'd sort of tried to retire at that point, but they pulled me back in. Mm-hmm. And so I came back in and initially started to work with them on, as a director of comms, if I were on the other side of the table from Tortoise, what would I be looking for that could be a partnership from a commercial aspect? Mm-hmm. So, obviously they're all over the editorial, but, commercially, how are we going to create a different revenue model for a newsroom that wasn't based on advertising?
Right.
So the idea was that you would kind of have partnerships where you took the Tortoise model, the Tortoise idea of convening conversations, collective understanding, and you'd run events or sessions within people's businesses, and that gave you a commercial model that was very different to most other news organizations.
Right.
So that's 3.5 years ago. As I said, I mean, we're a tiny startup, frankly. So you end up doing all sorts of things. I've done stuff on the commercial side. I kind of wore my old hat of PR more for certain things, like when we started launching some quite big things like Sweet Bobby and trying to sort of get our stories more visibility outside of our membership base. I did more work on sort of more what I call traditional sort of PR. And then more recently, I've just taken on a sort of new role, which is to work on our forums. So those are 5 verticals that we sort of take a deep dive into: energy, AI, food, investment, and then one specific one called the Responsible 100, which is a close look at the FTSE 100 against a set of criteria that we've developed, or an index we developed, that's sort of based on the SDGs, but adapted because they were designed for countries, and we kind of tweak them for companies. And what I do is I sort of bring the forums together from a sort of programming and a content perspective, say, right, what are the conversations in energy or AI that really need to be happening at the moment? And if we want to have the most useful, forward-looking, kind of action-oriented, where do we go from here, all under the banner of responsibility, then who do we need in the room to have those conversations? And I sort of build those forums from that perspective, which of course is just, it's like, I'm like a pig in mud. You know, all my favourite things: learning, masses of curiosity, and sort of matchmaking, bringing people together who I think will find it interesting. I mean, I'm in my dream job, basically.
So you mentioned that you'd being polite around age, but you mentioned you've been doing a hell of a lot of things for about 30 years, right? And so being able to be curious and learn, I'd say that is a gift in a job at any time. A little bit about Tortoise for the podcast audience is that, if just from my perspective, to simplify, there's a bit of a clue in the name. There's the idea originally is a slow news organization, so it takes time, doesn't do daily news. Yeah. Yes, there's now a plethora of different podcasts and newsletters and stuff, but broadly it's about taking time to invest in big stories like old-fashioned news. Yeah, and it's also, you're completely right, Tom, and it's really nice to hear you say that as somebody who consumes our stuff, because it sounds like we're getting some of it right. They're slow, which is like, you're not going to come to us to find out what's happened today. You're not going to put us on like Sky or BBC, but you're probably going to come to us to find out why. And more importantly, kind of what next, because news is very good at reporting what's happened. We're equally as interested in what's going to happen next. And I think that's sort of where we go from here conversation is it features into all of our stuff, and we always try to come in also very much from a sort of human narrative perspective. We want to tell you a story. Yes. The most exciting words apart from "will you marry me" are "I'm going to tell you a story." Yeah. Yeah. Or as one of my mentors always said to me, never make a point without telling a story. Well, I'm queen of anecdote. But the thing you say about sort of knocking around for quite a long time and still being curious, I think the thing that I've found has changed in me the most is I am so unafraid now to say, I don't know, or I don't understand that. Right. And I think, I don't know if that's an age thing, a confidence thing, or whatever, but to be honest enough to say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'd really like to find out. Or actually, I don't really understand that. Could you have another run at explaining that to me? I am so unafraid of saying that. And I think maybe when I was younger, I thought it was a sign of weakness to say, I don't understand. Well, I think that's. I want to come back to the strategic shift in the news and Tortoise, but what you just said there at a human level is huge, because we're both parents of a number of kids, and like not quite as many as you, Tom. Not true. Yeah. When you're trying to see how can you best support them, confidence is a big thing. And the corporate example that comes to mind to me is there are lots of top business leaders out there of large corporations that we know are really famous. But if you ask most people, they have no idea who the CEO of Microsoft is. Yeah. Yeah. And his name is Satya Nadella. Yeah. And there was a book, I think, I'm not sure, it was a ghostwritten or autobiography written a few years ago called Hit Refresh, because he turned around Microsoft. Yeah. But one of the key lessons from him is that he walks around the place and people go, "What should we do, boss?" Yeah. And his famous line is, he'll say, "I don't know. Yeah. What do you think?" But when he's parenting analogy is exactly the same. Yeah. To finish the point, and actually just to acknowledge, I'll try. But to acknowledge you is that if you deliver that from a position of fear, from a position of heck, I don't know. Yeah. But if you're in a team meeting or with anybody about any situation, you go, can you have another run? Explain that to me. I really didn't quite understand that. But the way you even said it just now exudes a confidence that there's not much I haven't had a go at in my career. Once I understand it, I'll be able to add value here and help the team, the business move forwards.
Yeah.
So having humility allied to confidence is what my friend Chip Connolly calls, being part of it in using the L word of leadership, is being a vulnerable visionary. Like saying, I don't know, like Nadella saying, I don't know, what do you think? It gives people an empowerment, but he's ultimately going to have the confidence to go, we'll work it out. I will make a decision if need be, or we'll get it sorted. And it just helps people step up.
But I think there is so much read across from maybe parenting for 20 years. And that's not suggesting in any way, your colleagues are children, not at all.
No.
But I've learned a huge amount from what I would call sort of instructive parenting, which is buckle your shoe, don't forget your school bag, have you got your swim kit? It's sort of like instruction-led parenting to suddenly finding myself with teenagers where that doesn't work anymore. So you have to say, when someone says, I don't know what to do about X, you go, well, what are your options?
Yeah.
And you say, well, what are the choices here? That's not, this is what you need to do, because you're not arming anybody with the ability to assess the situation by themselves. If you keep giving out instructions to your children, say, well, what you need to do is that, they won't form the kind of critical faculty to work these things out for themselves, or more importantly, to assess the risks of different options. So I remember just having this real moment with my girls thinking, this isn't about telling you what to do. This is about exploring the options with you. And so when I say, well, what are your options? And they go, well, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that. You say, okay, that's interesting. Which one are you leaning towards? And they go, well, I'm thinking that. And then you go, sounds perfect. You've got really good judgment. And you'd sort of, it would have been quicker to just say, do that. But you've basically trained them to trust their own judgment, because you're not going to be with them at moments where they're going to have to exercise that judgment. They're going to be in a situation where you're not around. So they've got to train it like a muscle. And I think that sort of course your children look to you for safety and security. But I think most of us when we've got a problem, we don't want a solution. We just want someone saying, I hear you.
Yeah.
You know.
It's like the old-fashioned and fairly gender stereotypical thing about if your wife gets home from work and says, I've had a terrible day, and they start telling you about it. Men should learn, if men can learn never to try to fix it for them, but just to say, would you like a glass of wine? I'll listen. It would help. Or
you sound like you handled it perfectly.
It's very good.
That's the line. You're
so so it sounds like if you're in a situation where you don't necessarily know in the moment exactly what to do, but you have that, you're now unafraid of not knowing, and so it's double negative, but you actually can then go and say, well, what do I need to know? You have a lot of journalists in the organization. You're not a journalist, but you do understand it. You come from a director of comms position. When we spoke before we came on, you've got a wealth of experience. You can be trusted in the team to know that you can, as you said, add value once you understand the perspective. It's connecting the dots. It's that curiosity and learning.
But it's completely aligned to what we try to create for everyone within Tortoise, whether you're a team member or whether you're a member. Because if you think about, so for people who don't understand it, one of the key, this because you've been to them, but one of our key sort of moments are our think-ins. And think-ins are open to members. They're kind of interactive sessions where we set ourselves a question that we're trying to answer. And we don't do it in a sort of phone way of creating a false, we have set ourselves a question and we have to, within an hour, try to answer it amongst ourselves. But the point is we need everybody to help us answer that question. And we need to draw on everybody in the room, virtually or physically, to help us sort of nut out the issue. Because there is a huge amount of collective learning in Tortoise in everything we do. But we also, I think, offer that to our members, which is like, come along. You could be the sort of leading expert in the country on this, or you could frankly be making spag bowl for tea as you're watching, and we should be able to bring everybody into that conversation. And by the end of it, everybody's sort of the same level. I'm a great believer there is nothing that's too complicated to explain if you know how to communicate.
Yes. So if we go back to the bit I was going to reference, I think it's fascinating the way you put it. I'm going to try to capture it. Is that when we look at traditional journalism, it's the 6 questions of why, what, who, where, when, who, that you have to answer, and it's factual and historical. Although if we go off at a tangent, people seem to have forgotten that news is actually meant to be factual now. But the perspective you're looking at is really interesting because it's actually really how we learn, right? Which is understanding what's happened up to this point, and then asking why did it happen, which is what you were saying before, and also what does this mean moving forwards. So it's actually future focused. That's a very big shift. So if I think of this as a frequent thinking participant, I think it's reasonable to say that James and Matt and the other editors will often pull me in at the chat when I'm in an hour, in a sort of kind of disproportionate way from the whole size of the audience. And I'm trying to self-assess and say that probably the reason behind that is because I'm on there because it's a topic I'm interested in. I might have some knowledge, but I'm going to listen really closely to what's being said by the panel. And if something comes up for me that I feel is a point of view or an idea that might add to the conversation, I'm also trained in comms too. So I'll say it relatively succinctly and then step away and then see if it adds. And I think that's just, I'm using that as, I think I'm suddenly realizing that from what you said, that's really an example of the ethos and what you're looking for. You're looking for something that people can, say, well, what does this mean for me? What does my knowledge base say? And what might I just throw into the pot that moves the conversation forwards, or even a slight tangent? Because sometimes those 1 hours, they can start out with one topic and actually almost finish on another one.
Oh, completely. Oh, no, we're the first to admit quite often we've asked completely the wrong question. Quite often you'll get to the end of that and go, well, that was the wrong question in the first place. We've realised what we should have been looking at is over here. And that's told us something already. And I think that your point about sort of taking people on and you presenting some sort of counterpoint that we might not have thought of, or is someone's gone, oh, hang on, bring that in, I like that, is precisely what was behind the whole thing. Because we've seen so many instances of where the sort of the media completely missed things, or had been so self-reinforcing in their own views and echo chambers that, so whatever you want to look at, there have been things that have come like, oh my God. And of course, if you probably invited a few more conflicting and challenging views into your thinking, you might have had a better rounded view of what might have been the outcome. So the whole point is, and the other thing is that I'm so totally self-referencing as a parent, but the whole idea of being able to sort of argue in a healthy way is increasingly a lost art. So we have this phrase that you'll hear all the time: civilized disagreement. It's entirely okay to disagree with someone if you do it in a way. And the analogy I always use with girls is, do not self-censor for fear of offence, but play the ball, not the man. You don't have to take someone down with their argument. You can play the ball, not the man. Play the argument. You don't have to personalise it. You don't have to offend. You can actually deconstruct an argument. And we need to remember how to do that, because I need challenging. I get things wrong. I get stuck in my thoughts on stuff. I need fresh perspectives. I need to be reminded that things have changed and that foundation for that opinion was a long time ago. That's fine. That's good. We need to evolve, but we need to be able to have the skills to challenge in that sort of, as we call it, civilized disagreement or constructive way, but just depersonalize being able to debate.
Let me share, Paul, to spinning off that for the audience, is that in my gig, I do a lot of professional work around leadership and team dynamics. And you mentioned this is really it's a fast growing and dynamic startup. And one of the pieces that I teach over and over again, which I give credit to Travis Carson for bringing it forwards, which is an idea called a breakdown recovery model. And there's some counterintuitive ideas in there, such as a successful team has more breakdowns than an unsuccessful team, as in a breakdown in sort of American English language, meaning you have oh my God, something's happened that's gone wrong, we need to fix it. Right? or we've had a disagreement, or we've had a conflict. If you're unsuccessful, it's because you drop into sort of gang mentality and you play the man, not the ball.
Yeah.
Right? To use that soccer analogy, football analogy, noting you have a global audience. But the language that they captured around when a team mindset is that Travis's definition of a team is a group of disagreeable people aligned around a common intention. A group of disagreeable people.
Disagreeable makes sense.
I'll come to aligned around a common intention, because there's also the definition of people who are willing to disagree with each other.
Yeah.
And as you say, they're looking at the idea.
Yeah.
And they're looking, but the common intention is, how do we move forwards from here? So something as simple as, how do we get, why has the coffee machine got coffee grounds in it so it's not working, which neither you and I could work out how to do it. But no, that's tiny. But it's like, well, how do we move forwards with this? Or something went wrong, or
so we had tea instead.
We had tea instead. We had a solution. So that's just an idea. I love the way that it's modeling that. And yes, absolutely, civilized disagreement in the terminology that you've used is a fascinating art. One of my mentees, who's very left of centre, way further left than that in his historical background, was running a charitable organisation. And they decided that they would have they're national. They decided it would be really important that they went to the Conservative Party conference. And they went, I need to be around people I disagree with.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Right. And I just,
that's what Christmas
but I thought it was really cool to actually be around there. And we think of, like we were talking about the individual earlier. One of the most successful podcasts in the UK is The Rest Is Politics, which has Alistair Campbell and Roy Stewart, who disagree agreeably is their language.
I know.
And they totally massive political, philosophical disagreements. But they can disagree agreeably, and that, if I'm being really positive about the state of dialogue in the world, that's built in the UK at least a huge audience.
Well, the appetite for it must be huge, because I don't think anyone in their right mind enjoys the sort of vacuous Punch and Judy show, do they? They want to hear ideas. I mean, this is, there is a hunger for content. We've seen it obviously because the way our listening figures have grown over the last couple of years. And I was just thinking back to you kind of coming on board just before COVID and that move to digital. And there are two things that just struck me from earlier in our conversation. One is, let's take my pen like this. One is how many leaders had to say, I don't know what's going to happen. So, you were forced into a sort of individualistic, compassionate, common, shared fear, or whatever you want to call it. So I thought that, we all went into that and no one had the answers. So that kind of leveled leaders, I thought, within organizations. And the second point was, I'd be interested to know what you thought on the other end of it. But what I felt was happening when we went digital with our thinkings, there's a very noisy tea trolley about to go past, was that at a time when people felt such a loss of agency. We were in a proper hard lockdown, rights had been restricted, we were isolated and fearful. That becoming part of something where your voice could be heard, I think really mattered. I think being seen and being heard and being able to express within the community of people we built up during those thinkings. We had tens and tens of thousands of people. It was 35,000 people at thinkings during the lockdown.
Wow.
And you've got to think there was something happening there that made people want to be, to give them a voice when they felt really powerless and to be seen and heard. Okay,
so the 2 points you made, the first one around leaders having to come on and actually say they didn't have the answers. The thing is, it doesn't stop the journalists or the participants, because just to explain, you would have members of the editorial team monitoring and participating in massively active chats that would often go in 3 or 4 different directions at once. And so typically people like Matt D'Ancona or James Harding would be hosting, but have somebody giving them a word in their ear saying,
go to
when you need to know, go to this person about this.
Yeah.
Because you cannot possibly, having done it myself, you can't possibly be paying attention to your panelists and monitoring the chat at the same time.
Well, do you know, I've done a few, and I haven't done live telly, but I should imagine it's the closest you'll get to doing live telly. It is a real skill, and as I say, I probably the only reason I've done a couple is because I haven't got the skill. I mean, what you're trying to do is all of those things. You're trying to, and sometimes you're doing it with a room full of people.
Yeah. Some
people online, slightly kind of, the producer in your ear, but they're not, because you're trying to monitor a chat. And what you're trying to do is listen to what people are saying, keep the conversation moving to the next logical stage, follow a chat, bring input. It's a lot going on. It is a lot
and
going
so
on.
my thoughts, you asked me, my thoughts were as a participant were one is, if I think about the people, the visible hosts, like James, Matt, or whoever, their style of hosting was really, so there were 2 or 3 thoughts around what this is like at the beginning as a participant or a guest, right? Not a guest, sorry, just one of the audience member. Language. So
part of the family.
Part of the family, there you go. So one is that these are experienced journalists and they can ask really hard questions, but they were also empathetic.
Yeah.
So they were actually very understanding.
Yeah.
So what it did was create a space for the panelists, and there might be one person or 3 people, but literally often within 10 minutes, you've gone to somebody in one of the members or the other audience, because you also open it up to wide audience beyond members. So that was part of it. And I think the other part was, yes, only a certain number of people are going to speak from the listening audience. But the chats were massively active, and people felt a commonality of experience, and I think that was my experience.
That's great
to feel a commonality of experience. So what it wouldn't necessarily, my experience would be different from others. It wouldn't necessarily for me be about community and landing on this stuff, because I was constantly online. I got a DBT 6 weeks into the COVID. 6 weeks into COVID, because I had not left my desk. I was sitting there 14 hours a day because I'm experiencing crisis management and operationally. So I just was like, and a bunch of business networks, I went just like, open me up to everybody. They can book on my system, and I'll spend half an hour with 10 businesses every half day and help them out. And I never left my desk. I was living in central London, and I ended up getting a DBT.
Oh, stop.
So I had plenty of community, but it was that commonality of experience. And I'd be sitting there, thematically listening to all these people around business and what's going on, and going, I've got these thoughts going on in my head, and what if everybody else has got these thoughts going on in their head? And so whether or not you're actually active in the chat, or you're making the dinner for somebody, because they're often at 6 in the evening, or whether or not you're participating, or whether or not your voice is on the mic, it was the empathy of the hosts and the commonality of experience, and you were saying earlier, like you shy away from the word of leadership, but for me, it's that leadership is also about creating a space. And when you talked earlier about, and I am going to sort of, as we say in my part of the world, big you up, I'm going to acknowledge you, is when you're somebody with a lot of business experience and you actually release any fear of like not knowing the answer, ask the question, but then have that confidence piece. That's modeling what you want the whole team to do. So, and just like the holding space is a really important thing. I'm a trained coach. I will occasionally use coaching language, but that's what the digital thinkings did. They held space for the panelists and for the whole Tortoise team, a lot of whom would be actively on there each evening because they were stuck at home and you weren't in the office.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for all the members of the audience.
Yeah.
So they and you continue to do that, right? Yeah. Some of them are digital, some of them are in person.
Yeah.
And what you mentioned it before, for those who are not familiar, the Sweet Bobby podcast was about catfishing, and was a stunning, long developed, and it even was not all recorded, then released one a week, because you got to the point where
we were live reporting
it out. And I think it was the biggest podcast in the UK at the time when it came out.
Just gone through 10 million listens.
10 million listens. So
Lexi Bostel cats.
So
yay!
And of course you're like, so here I am. I was trying to retire. I got drawn back in, and I have to get involved with PR around a massive podcast. And
was slightly beyond my skill set of asset management, investment banking, and online gambling from my previous career. And again, I mean, you talk to the team here. We didn't know what we were doing when we started.
But you had confidence you're going to work it out.
Well, we're not entirely stupid as a bunch of people. We sort of worked it out. Now we have got some very clever people who really do know what they're doing, like Alice Sampson, who's head of growth and audio. But the rest of us were sort of gifted amateurs at the time, figuring it out as we sort of went along. But it was, again, if you look at Sweet Bobby, what we were doing there was we took what essentially would have been a Daily Telegraph page 3 marmalade dropper story of horrendous catfishing, which you could just do a sort of true crime sensationalist podcast about it. Of course, you approach it the Tortoise way, which is
why.
Well,
sorry, I'm jumping in, but yeah,
no, we're not going to give it away. Okay.
No,
because you've got to listen. If you haven't listened, that's a big reveal. But it's also, where do we go from here? How do you stop it happening again? Where is the digital crime legislation that treats coercive control in a digital space as seriously it treats it in a physical space? So there's always a sort of, okay, well, we've heard this awful story, rather than just being sort of, tourists at someone else's tragedy. Well, what do we do with it? Where do we go from here? Exactly the same with hidden homicides, exactly the same, with sort of most of our big series of podcasts. It's sort of saying, well, we could just report it because it's a gripping story, but we're always going to report it with a human story at the centre of it. And we're always going to report it in a way that says, well, where do we go from here?
So basically, if somebody pitches you a podcast series, which of course you then have to invest resources, funds around, it's going to be about, let's have a human story at the centre. It's going to be about something that we as a society need to understand here. And there's some questions that need to be asked at the end. Now, it's not, the sufficient background, whether it's a slow news story, a podcast series, or anything, or even a think-in for an hour, that has enough depth and richness to the conversation that means that it will mean that the question that's asked at the end is a good question. And it's one that can be taken on by other people, because it's not the role of Tortoise to actually answer those questions, but it's a little bit like when I'm working as a coach, one of the most profound compliments I can ever get from somebody is if they pause and then say, that's a good question. Right. So if at the end of something that your organization does, they go, you've really posed a good question. And there's so much. I noticed that in this dynamic first couple of months of the pandemic, sometimes the natural, because we're all nervous and we're all not quite dealing with things that we were intending to, but I felt sometimes the thing has lost their way a little bit, because they were diving into the minutiae of the moment, because we all were, right? But that ethos that's been created 4 years ago and really accelerated with the pandemic with Tortoise, I just love it, because it's about this, what has happened. That's the journalistic bit. Why is that important? Why did it happen? Why is it important? What do we need to what questions do we need to ask?
Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here?
Yeah. But the other thing, I don't know if you found this, but one of the I don't think I realise how lucky I am day to day just working with such exceptional people. I think I get a little bit blasé about it, and sometimes it just comes back and hits me. I think, God, I have been more intellectually challenged in the last 4 years than all of the rest of my career put together. In terms of getting a mental workout. But in that spirit of not being made to feel stupid, we're all learning together. We're all learning things all the time. Even the cleverest people in this place don't know everything. Actually, I think Matt Duncan does know.
Pretty much does know everything, yeah.
But I'll retract that. But
he's not eligible for the quiz.
But the point about it is, and I hope, and this is something I feel just in life generally, which is, none of us are here to make life more difficult for each other. We're here to make it easier for each other. And there's a lovely phrase that Jane, my boss, always says, which is, you can take things seriously, but you don't have to take yourself seriously. And I think that also runs, I warm very much to that phrase, because I think, again, it comes back to a sort of humanity and openness, which is, of course, some of these issues are really seriously, but we don't have to be harmless about it. We don't have to be self-aggrandizing about it. We can approach it with an honesty and a humility that says, this is really awful, and we're going to go into this holding hands and do it together.
Openness, humility, curiosity, and learning. There you go.
Yeah.
There's some good lessons.
Yeah.
Now I do like to, and you've pretty much done it, but I do like to finish by letting my guests have the last word. Any closing thoughts for the audience?
No, I mean, it's great. I mean, it's really nice to, after our sort of digital,
to meet in real life,
just be sitting side by side. That is a great joy of the post-pandemic world. But I think what you're doing is lovely. I don't know how much use this will be to Tom, but there are a few thoughts on 30 years plus.
I think if you were to, I'm not going to suggest you watch it back because that might be too much for you. You might stick the podcast on, on the headphones at some point and go. And I think I would encourage you to self-aggrandize yourself, not to anybody else, because you say you hate doing that.
No, but as I said to you,
there's been a lot of wisdom in this.
Well, you're very sweet, but as the squeamishness comes from that wonderful quote from Alistair Campbell when he was Blair's communications guy. He said, once you become the story, you stop doing your job well. And I've obviously been, deeply trained as director of comms to never be the story. So talking to you is taking me way out.
Well, Tessa, thank you for being the story today. That'll do. We'll wrap it up. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.